the 10th Curmudgeon in the Dungeon that I've done for YouTube. Not my 10th one altogether. And I've noticed a thing or two about my habits doing these. I'm not real regular. I did this one only a few days after the last just because I had so many questions to answer. And what else did I notice? I seem to always start these sometime after midnight. I've always functioned best between 11 p.m. and 2 a.m. That's when my juices flow, or in this case, my mouth runs. I have several things to talk about this week, almost all of them in response to either questions on previous videos or discussions I've noted around social media having to do with gaming. And I have a list over here because I actually thought it out in advance and thought about all this stuff, so I hope to keep it shorter and more to the point. All right, I have to look at the list, but I believe I know where we're starting. Yes, I was asked about Dragon Magazine being a official, unofficial supplement to the game system. Again, it goes back to the original concepts behind let's throw lots of ideas out and let people have fun with them. If you didn't have our background with the infamous appendix, you didn't have as many toys in your toy box. And so we were continually throwing out ideas to say, here's how somebody else did it, take it and run with it, and you do it. And Dragon Magazine was the place for that. Certain things were published in Dragon Magazine that we knew were going to go into the game system. We knew that. I'm going to talk about one of the one of the more problematic children of all this much later on in tonight's talk. But we threw a lot of stuff out there. Some of it ended up in AD&D. It wasn't intentional. I would find a good article. And again, as I pointed out earlier, I didn't have to run anything by Gary before I published it. So I'd find a good article and I think, oh, this is an interesting idea. And perhaps that idea ended up morphed a little bit or not at all and absorbed into the game system. And that's why there's such an enormous list of people whose names are comprise a large paragraph in the front of the hardbounds about all the people that have bits and pieces that they contributed to the final work. And yeah, a lot of them came out of Dragon Magazine, but that's not why we did them. We put stuff in there to keep up interest, to keep the ball rolling, keep the rocket shooting, pick your metaphor. And some of them, yes, ended up there, but that wasn't the intent when we started. Not at all. It was just, hi, here's some more neat ideas, just like we did the fiction stuff and some of the other things. Next. Saw an very interesting discussion on social media a 3 days ago. It happened to be about blink dogs. So those of you who are discussing this back and forth, you know who you are. And there seemed to be early on in the discussion, how can a dog be lawful? Well, there was a fundamental meaning to the lawful versus chaotic. As originally conceived, lawful meant that you were a creature of habit, not that you wore a badge. You could be predicted to react in a familiar way, given a familiar situation time and time again. You weren't a kinder or an elf who was constantly flitting off. Okay, that's chaotic. Without meaning to offend anyone, as a former teacher, the personality that can't focus or won't focus on something, or you literally have no idea how they're likely to react at any given provocation. Even if they've reacted one way before, they might react a different way. That's chaotic. That's elves. All right, elves. Which isn't to say that Legolas wasn't a nice guy, but remember Gary's animus towards elves, and a lot of wasn't real fond of the Tolkien influence on the game. Lawful meant that you behaved in a certain way. It didn't mean you were boring, but a blink dog was lawful. It was intelligent, and it was good, and so they would react in a similar fashion when confronted with evil. You could expect a similar reaction, or at least a reaction every time. And it would probably be, at the very least, mildly antagonistic, perhaps. But lawful meant that people could write a book about how something was the same again and again and again. It's hard to pick monsters out, because remember, these things don't exist anyway. But something as intelligent as a blink dog could be lawful in that they could be expected to not align themselves with evil, to not get involved with evil, to perhaps even resist evil because of the good, and perhaps do it in a consistent way, the lawful. You could be chaotic good and resist evil this way one time, and another way another time, and then react to it a third way another. But the basic, the essence of the alignments as they were originally conceived were predictability, rational thought, unpredictability, non-rational thought. And if you look through the monsters in the very first books, before we got real exotic with some of this stuff, I think you'll pick up on what I'm trying to explain to you, and how we perceived lawful. It didn't have anything to do with wearing a badge. Now, that said, we get to the paladin. Well, the paladin is going to be lawful good because he lives by a rigid code. All right, if you lived by a code, you could be lawful. A ranger or a woodsman who doesn't kill anything except what he needs to eat, etc., and doesn't just takes care of the woods, doesn't leave messes, etc., etc. He could be considered lawful because he behaves in a certain fashion. I hope that helps a little bit. I'll be glad to discuss it further if you have other questions. By all means, bring up what ifs or whatever, and I'm glad to talk about it. Now let me look at what's next. I was asked if I could show my old OD&D books, and the answer is no. I'm sorry, I can't. I don't have any anymore. What I do have is I have some very crystal clear PDFs of all the books from Chainmail to Swords and Spells that were bound into a hardbound and given to me as a gift by a gentleman from the East Coast who does this for a hobby. And so I don't have the covers, but I can show you what they looked like, and I'll share something. And this is not a commercial product. These were made by a friend of mine who had too much time on his hands. They look like this. Let me get that flat. Okay. This one never existed. You look carefully and see the names accredited. They were never published like that. I have another one that's on Clerics. Okay, but this is what they looked like. The art wasn't as good. Illusionist, and then I have, of course, I must have the Magic Users book. That's what they looked like. To find them today is very rare. If it's in good quality, a good condition, it's in the hands of a collector somewhere. But that's what the books used to look. That's what the original books looked like. Those are what's known as the little brown books. There were 7 of them altogether. Okay. I was asked to expand on clerics and religions and stuff, some comments that I'd made earlier. I'll start right out by saying I was raised a Catholic. I went to 8 years Catholic school, which turned me agnostic for a while. Now I'm almost a deist, I guess. I don't know. But I was raised that religion's a private thing, so I never paid much attention to clerics and stuff. And to be honest, in my first campaign, we never had a cleric that wanted to sit down and build a church to Saint so-and-so or whatever, you know. There might have been, you know, money set aside for a shrine because that gives you some, you know, some pluses and some good vibes and you know, maybe some better karma with whoever you serve or worship. But it's a personal squeamishness that I never got into. Deities and demigods was after my time. The ones we did in Gods, Demigods, and Heroes were all well-known pantheons, including a couple of fictional ones that later had to be pulled out. I just never got into it. I don't get into it now. I have clerics, I have 15 pre-gens that I've used for several years, and some of the cons I go to, people look for their favorite one they played last time or the last 3 times, whatever. But they're clerics, but I don't get into who they worship or anything, because that brings us up to another alignment problem, and I don't want to get into that. And again, one of the last things I'm going to speak about tonight has to do with alignment problems. So I'll tie this together when I get to that. It's just a personal thing. If somebody had, you know, if I was still running a campaign and somebody came to me and said, I want to build a church and all that, and they wanted to get into that kind of detail and give me a backstory on you know, who they worship or their canon or their canon law, you know, or whatever. Okay, fine, that's cool. And I would react accordingly anytime the cleric in question was on Occam's razor. I'd always make sure he got shoved to the good side as opposed to the bad, because he was in good because he'd gone the extra mile, or at least a half mile, whatever. You see where I'm going there with that. It's never really played a lot of importance in my campaigns. Just never has. Next. Somebody wanted to know about Titan. I got a story about Titan. Those who don't know, Titan, the monster board game, was designed by Dave Tramp and Jason. I'll think of his name in a second. McAllister. Sorry, Jason. And I first saw it as a handful of twigs, sticks, green plastic army men, a couple of American Indians, blue and yellow, in a big patch of dirt underneath a tree at Parkside at a Gen Con. I had met Tramp. I already knew him in cartoons and whatever, and he came to from there. And I believe I may have even published a couple at this point in time. And he came to me. He says, "We got this really neat game we've been developing." And we went out and we sat under the tree, and he scratched out the rough outlines of a movement cycle, the loops you get into in this game. It has a very, very unique movement system, and it can be very frustrating when you're trying to get somewhere else to add to your legion, which we would call a stack in other board games. You build up these legions who then go to war on your behalf and fight other legions and what have you. So anyway, I got to see that game right up in the beginning. And I was intrigued by the movement system, the fact that they had all these different monsters, and it was all mobs of monsters fighting other mobs of monsters. I found very attractive, no alignments, anything like that. And then when the game came out, Jason and Dave published it themselves under the name of Gorgon Star Games. And it was a labor of love, a lot of screen printing, which meant that if you didn't spray fixative on the pieces and on the game box, any dampness would make the inks run. Wonderful game. I thought it was a really interesting twist on the normal roll dice and move. Just couldn't get in where you wanted to go, or couldn't land where you needed to land. Oh, rats, got to try it again. Frustration, or take the next option. And like I said, I got to play it right at the very, very, very beginning. To be honest, I don't know if Avalon Hill has done any extensive tweaks to the game since they got it. I have no idea. I haven't played it in a long, long time. I got heavily involved in it in the very beginning. I was part of the fan base. I was the white scribe. There were various ranks of players and whatever, and I had a unique position. I was the white scribe, and of course, yeah, we wrote about it too. And I wrote about the game when I did, not because it was Tramps, but because it was a neat game, and it was. And when I went to Adventure Gaming, second or third Adventure Gaming I did, we had a big article on Titan and playing it better. I don't know if those PDFs are available online somewhere or not. If you're interested in the articles, if nobody can find them, let me know, and perhaps I can scan them and make them available. Time for the next. I was asked what I thought about various other non-TSR RPGs. And without trying to offend anybody, I'm really not much interested in the majority of them. Don't care. It's a question of you found something you really, really like. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Now, I have looked at some of the more exotic role-playing games, Burning Wheel, some of the Burning Wheel stuff. There is one that I really admire for its difference and its approach, and that's Mouseguard. I don't know if you know about Mouseguard. Mouseguard is obviously you're all playing mice, and you don't get experience points for killing stuff. You get to fix damage by accomplishing missions. You get to fix damage by being true to yourself, which is everybody has an ethos, an ethic that they state. Yours might be that you always face the unknown at the point of your sword. And so every time you do that, it's noted. And so you don't really go up in levels. Anyway, I think it's a marvelous approach. And I think it would be brilliant to play it with kids, because everybody can be a mouse and go out and collect the seeds and scare away the cat and all this kind of stuff. I think, and be true to your ethic and be true to your comrades. And it teaches a lot of really interesting. I think it could teach a lot of really interesting stuff. The system revolves around a lot of interesting points and bits of gameplay. But other than that, now to further on that, I think Dungeon Crawl Classics is brilliant in that the funnel, while ridiculing, pays homage to the very old beginning of writing up first level characters and having them die and roll up a new one, and having them die and roll up a new one. I like the idea that on a funnel, you sit down with a whole stack of 0 level characters. Hi, I'm Clem. I lived on a farm. I have a big stout stick. And whoever's Clem died, you go to whoever's next in the pile. And whoever's alive at the end is the one that becomes a level 1. And I like that. I think it's so much fun. And I've watched funnels being done at cons, and people are just having a ball. And so by the same token, Mutant Crawl Classic is a post-apocalyptic, dysfunctional, mutant-laden role-playing game, and uses much the same mechanic and everything as Dungeon Crawl Classics, and is equally fun. And let's go explore and let's go experiment, and guess I shouldn't have touched that button after all. And I like that aspect of it. I like the goofiness of it, the mutations that can happen to people. You can end up with the head of a chicken. Hopefully you still speak common, or end up with a leg of a hawk because of a spell mishap. I think that kind of stuff is fun. And I think that what I find so appealing is I don't think it's meant to develop such an intense, deep involvement in a single character that you spend your months and years nurturing up. It's more about, hey, let's get together and have some fun. And once a guy gets up to 3rd or 4th level, or it's not very far, oh heck, let's go do it again, because the fun was in getting there. And that was very much the original game, except we went to about 10th level before we started over. So in that regard, I admire those two non-TSRs. I don't know a whole lot about a lot of the other ones, so I'm not too qualified to say I'm not been all that interested, I guess. I've read some interesting ones, but reading them is one thing, and playing them and finding the holes in them, as I've learned by painful experience, is quite something else. Let's see. Oh, yes. All right, the last thing tonight, and it also is going to touch on some other points I mentioned earlier. Alignments, for one thing. And Dragon Magazine, except in this case, Dragon wasn't guilty, Greyhawk was, and that's the thief. As it happened in my Carbondale campaign, we had one guy that was an incredibly successful thief and would not have thought about picking the pockets of any of the other guys. Probably because we were all students together. There were probably metagaming things involved with that. But Hobbit was his nickname. Would never have thought of picking anybody's pockets or palming something in the loot divvy. So I never really had to deal with that problem and, decide how I would deal with it in the future. Fast forward several years. My first pre-gens, I was stupid. I was putting alignments on pre-gens. And of course, I always have thieves in my pre-gens for the skill set that they bring. And I was giving them alignments that allowed them latitude to, I was making them mostly, chaotic, neutral, They're thieves. They look out for themselves. Well, it was very disruptive in convention play because the guys that played them all the time were acting out their alignment. My bad. My pre-gens don't have any alignments assigned to them now. Thieves, I'm not sure why Gary did it. They came out as a class. They were originally intended to come out as a specialist NPC, and I think maybe Gary saw the first time that I could put this out as an NPC, but they're going to turn it into a player, so I might as well just put it out as a player. The skill set they bring is extremely valuable. The trap checker, the tripwire looker for, the door peeker, the skill sets that they have that everybody else doesn't have are valuable to the party. Some DMs in the early days would not allow a player to be a thief because they were dealing with the alignments, and the thieves were disrupted, play in their alignment. So they only allowed thieves as NPCs to be hired for a job. Playing thieves in a campaign, in my mind, has got to be extremely tough. Thieves will be thieves. They became thieves because they like pretty sparkly things that didn't belong to them, and they sought to get them. So they became thieves. Or they were starving on the street as a kid and they learned to cut purses. Okay. Whatever your hard luck story is, or however cynical you want to be, thieves I find to be extremely difficult to deal with in a campaign without either citing them for not playing their character or for the disruption they're going to cause from stealing from everybody. And everybody knows how it gets to be when notes go up and down the table. Everybody gets super paranoid. It's just something that I don't really deal with. When I had my home campaign, there were no thieves. Nobody wanted to be a thief, mainly because they got to start up at a decent level. I don't remember, 4th, 5th, I don't know, something like that. We started at to get it rolling faster because everybody was experienced players, and I was playtesting stuff for later publication or use. So they had to not be cannon fodder to be good playtesters. They had to had to have a chance of living through. So Thieves in a campaign, I have no good advice for that. I can only say that I don't really care for them in a campaign. It would be, I wouldn't have a problem if we had another guy in it, if I was running another home campaign, if I had a guy like Hobbit was back in college and said, I just have these amazingly gifted fingers and a knack for complex mechanisms, and I really have no desires to steal from all you guys. I'd still call him a thief, and I'd still give him some of the benefits of the thief class in a heartbeat, because he wouldn't be a disruption to the group. And I don't often ding or reward extra EPs or XPs for playing in character or not playing in character. I don't let that factor in a whole lot. I just don't. If somebody that isn't feeling good that night, maybe they don't want to sit down and face a combat that's going to involve 20 or 30 die rolls. However good a chance they may have of coming out on the other end victorious, maybe they just don't want to. So I'm gonna, ding him. We're all friends. We're all having a good time. At least that's what we're supposed to be doing. And I guess that just about wraps me up for tonight. My list is emptied, as always. Questions, responses, comments, and I have grist for another one. Or you'll just be forced to listen to me ramble on about whatever I think up on my own. I did this one rather quickly after the last one, simply because I had a lot of things I wanted to talk about and not forget any of them. And so on that note, I will wish you all a pleasant gaming experience for your next 12 times out. There's always going to be a bummer. Might as well be 13.